Hello all, I'm Sai and in today's video I'm bringing to you my June reading wrap up. June was an extremely amazing reading month for me because I managed reading a total of 20 books in June, of which 7 are physical books and 13 are audiobooks. There's a huge number of audiobooks from June because 12 of the 13 audiobooks which I listened to belong to one single series, and also one of the 7 physical books is also part of the same series. I'll be talking about the series as well as all the other books shortly, and personally 20 books seems like a good number since we are also exactly halfway through the year. Don't forget to leave your June wrap up also down in the comments because I'd like to know what you had read. So without any further ado, let's get into the books right away. Let us start with the physical books as always. So the first physical book which I read in June is The Assassin's Blade by J Maas, which is the collection of novellas within the Throne of Glass series. Now this is a collection of 5 novellas which were initially published as ebooks, and after the series got very popular, all the 5 novellas were binded up together and published as this book, which is The Assassin's Blade. Now I've heard that many people loved this book compared to the first 3 to 4 books inside the series, and I can understand it to a little extent, but personally for me, I think that the second book was much better compared to this one. Now, I might have also felt like that because people went on hyping this book up way too much for me, and that itself built up a lot of expectations in my mind. And for the other 2 books which I've read before this one, I did not have that great expectations. So the second book was just really interesting and entertaining for me, while this was not as much. All the 5 novellas inside this collection are also chronologically ordered. I personally suggest you to read this collection of novellas after you finish reading the first 2 books, because there are certain characters from the first 2 books whose backstories are also tied up with the main character's backstory here, and if you know about them a little bit, it'll be much more interesting and fun to read this one. So yeah, this was fun and I'll be continuing on with the series, and I rated this one 4 stars. The next one is a standalone fantasy / dark academia book, and it is A Study in Drowning by Ava Reid. Now, I wanted to read this book so badly because I've heard really great things about this author's writing, and the other 2 books which have been written by this author were quite expensive for me, so I did not read them and went forward and started with this one. And trust me, it is one of the most atmospheric books that I've read so far this year at least. The perfect time, if you ask me, to read this book is when it is pouring down outside. In a way, it was supportive for me because here in Chennai we have been having rains on and off throughout June, and during the days while I read this book, it was raining outside, and it just perfectly provided the ambience for me. But if you are able to read this during the monsoon season, it will be just perfect. Here we follow our main character Effie, who lives in this very patriarchal world, and she is a student of architecture, but she wanted to study literature. But just because she is a woman, she is not allowed to study literature, and she also has this very favorite author of hers who ends up dying, and she gets this opportunity to go to the author's estate or mansion and help the author's son rebuild that mansion all over again. Apart from her, there is also this other student who's a boy from the literature college who also ends up going to the same mansion along with Effie, and he is trying to disprove that the author was the genius that he is said to be. Amongst all these things, there are also some dark things brewing on, especially when it comes to Effie's side, and this book also deals with certain triggering content like sexual assault and such. So if you're going to read this book, please do keep those in mind, and the way in which the author deals with them and expresses them through the character here is really good. I entirely loved the experience of reading this book, and I ended up rating it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next we have a non-fiction book which I've been meaning to read for quite a few years now, and I also ended up buying the book around 1 year before, and I wanted to read it back then in 2023 itself, but because of various reasons I was just putting it off and procrastinating on reading this book. Finally, I had the guts to go forward and read this because this was something which had to do with a lot of my stuff, and the book is Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. And this book basically talks about the power of vulnerability and how we as people need to be normalizing being vulnerable as a very important thing in life, because it will just increase the quality of each and every one of our lives in each and every sphere or facet really well. The author just explains each and everything with clear data that after reading those things, we cannot go back and think that I'm going to be this closed off, cold person, because that's just who I am. Because each and every one of us as human beings crave that connection with other human beings who are either like us or unlike us. And one of the best ways to develop such beautiful connections with people is being vulnerable with them, and also being vulnerable with them in the right way. There are also some chapters inside this book which confronted me a lot and showed me that there are certain instances in my life while I thought that I was being vulnerable, but I wasn't doing it right. I'm sure that it sounds weird for many people that there's a right way to be vulnerable and there is also a wrong way. I did not know that before reading this book, and it was very helpful for me. I have a lot of highlights in this one. I have not gone through them yet. That's why I'm not putting any tabs. Still, it was a very solid and useful read for me, and I rated this one also 4 stars. The next book is the book club pick for June, and this took quite a while for me to get into, and the first 100 to 200 pages of the book were a bit difficult for me to get through, but after that I just fell into the story and loved reading it so much that I finished reading the rest of the book in just 2 days, and it is The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle by Haruki Murakami. This is actually a bind-up of 3 novels which were initially published as 3 volumes in Japanese, and then after being translated into English they were binded up as a single volume. So essentially this is 3 books put into one inside the English language for us, and this is quite a difficult book to explain, okay, because of all the Murakami books that I've read so far, this one felt like the one which did not seem like having a defined plot at all. It just had things happening for the character, just like in the other books of his too. But I could describe the story in some way or the other without spoiling it to other people. But for this one, I'm not able to, because we just follow our main character, Toru, and he's a man who's 30 years old. He and his wife are living in this house, and he is currently unemployed. His wife is okay with that, and she is a working woman. The book happens in the early 90s, and out of nowhere, the main character here gets some obscene calls from a woman. He ends up meeting another woman who is kind of psychic and has very supernatural powers to predict the future and stuff. He also becomes friends with a 16-year-old girl who has a lot of things that are common with him, and she also has her own approach towards life. And obviously his cat has gone missing because it's a Murakami book. All these things just weave together, and there are certain times during which the plot just escalates and the things that happen to the characters just escalate. We also get a little bit of historical fiction here and there because of certain characters who are old and have survived through the Second World War. It was such an interesting book, and I think it had a definitive ending if you ask me. So I did enjoy reading this one, but I cannot describe it better than this to anyone without spoiling it. So I ended up rating this one also 4 stars. Next we have an adult LGBTQ plus romance book, and I wanted to read this book specifically because of Pride Month in June, and the book is Glitterland by Alexis. This also has the sequel short story for this book, which is Aftermath. Here we follow our main character Ash Winters, who is bipolar, and he's not having a really good time in his life right now. His books are like mildly successful, because of which people end up recognizing when he tells out his name, and he's also quite successful as an author because he is making good money and he is living a comfortable life. But because of this mental illness that he has, his life has become much difficult for him, and he's also not able to have normal relationships with the people around in his life. During this time only, he ends up meeting this other guy named Darian, and they hit it off, and from then on their love story is the main plot of this book. I've read one other book by this author, which is Boyfriend Material. I think I read it like 3 years back, and it was such a mature, beautifully written story. But this one was much more smarty than that one if you ask me. The representation of mental health in both that book and this one are really, really well done. Especially in this one, the author just showed us how bad this main character is feeling and what all can happen to a person who is having bipolar disorder. It was really, really well done, and at times I felt like the smut inside the book was just a bit too much for my taste. Other than that, it was quite a good book, and also the following short story Aftermath was also nice. So I ended up rating this one also 4 stars. Now I'm going to combine the last physical book along with the next 12 audiobooks, because all these 13 books together belong to a single series, and the series is A Series of Unfortunate Events by Lemony Snickett, which is a middle grade mystery adventure kind of series. Now, in this series, we basically follow our 3 main characters who are siblings, namely Violet, Klaus, and Sunny Baudelaire. Violet is a 14-year-old girl, Klaus is 12 years old, and Sunny is just a baby. Now, the thing that these 3 Baudelaire siblings are dealing with is that their parents have just passed away in a fire that has caused in their house while they were on a beach, and because of this, all the 3 children have been orphaned. During this time only, the guardian for these 3 children, who's Mr. Poe, ends up saying that all these 3 children should be brought up by the nearest living relative for their parents, who ends up being this man named Count Olaf, and the 3 children are being brought up by him. The parents have also left a huge fortune for the children, but the catch is that the money can be taken out of the account and used only after the eldest child, who's Violet Baudelaire, comes of age, that is when she becomes 18 years old, so that the money can be used of her own will. Now the thing with Count Olaf is that he's trying to loot away the fortune that the Baudelaire children have inherited, and starting from there he does a lot of devious things to take the money away from the children and also makes the lives of these children very, very miserable. I just started with the first book because it was very, very short and linked. Okay, I think it was hardly 3 hours as an audiobook, and I listened to it in 2 times speed, so it was hardly 1.5 hours. I even remember now, for the first 3 to 4 days that I was reading the series, I was finishing 2 books per day, and it was just going really, really well for me. It was not anything out of the world. At the same time, it was not something so basic also. I'm usually someone who is not very attracted towards middle grade books nowadays because I feel like I am a very old person. But with this series, I did not feel it that much because the author just makes the story very much interesting. There are certain things which are very typical of middle grade stories. For example, certain things keep on happening over and over again. That is that each and every guardian that the children are moved to from one book to another seems to be a person who's not fit to take care of them, and someone who's fit enough to take care of them is not allowed to take care of the children. It just keeps on happening over and over and over again. And only towards the last 4 or 5 books we see the pattern of the story or the plot inside the books changing and something new happening over and over again. There are also characters from the first and second books who reappear in the last 2 books in the series also, which just makes all the books inside the series really well connected together. My most favorite part of the series compared to anything is the sibling dynamic that we have here. These are 3 little children, okay? Now, Violet is clearly a teen. She is in the early teenhood, and Klaus is a boy who's going to get into his teen age, and the youngest sibling, Sunny, is literally just a baby. How these 3 kids together survive all the things that they are going through and keep on helping each other out and being there for each other is the thing about the series which I just loved to the core. I've said many times that I'm a sucker when it comes to sibling dynamics or sibling stories, and this entire series itself just revolves around these 3 siblings, which just made it a huge selling point for me. I had the 7th book alone from the series, which is the exact middle book if you ask me for the series, and it is The Vile Village. I read this one alone physically, and all the other 12 books I listened to as audiobooks, and it was really, really nice. Okay, most of the series was also narrated by the author himself in the Storytel app. All the 13 books are available in the Storytel app. So as a whole, I can say that this was a solid series, and if you're looking forward to introduce your children or the children that you might know into the habit of reading, this would be a great series to start with. Anyone who's between 8 and 13 years of age can read the series because it is perfect for that category if you ask me. Even if you're an adult like me or if you're a teen also, you can go forward and read it because it is light and also quite dark at the same time because of all the things that are happening inside the story. In order to give you an idea of the writing of the author inside the story, the dark humor that he deals with for children, I'll read the first dedication line alone from this book. He writes this to his lost love. For Beatrice, when we were together, I felt breathless. Now you are. Just see the amount of darkness and humor in that one sentence itself. It's just out of the world, and the entire series is just following the same tone. So if you're interested, go forward and try reading the series. It is a solid 4-star series for me, and I'm very glad that I ended up reading it. So the last and final book inside this wrap-up is a book which is between fiction and non-fiction. I'm not sure how to categorize it, and the book is Maktub by Paulo Coelho, which is his most recent release. It was very popular, I think, in the beginning of the year. I wanted to listen to it as an audiobook back then itself because, again, it was available for me inside the app, but for some reason I was just delaying it, and finally I just went forward and listened to it just like a couple days back, and I should say that it was really, really nice. Okay, it's just a collection of stories or thoughts that Paulo Coelho has learned from his gurus, and it's also just a collection of philosophical stories which can help us understand and navigate through life without, taking things so seriously. The author also says that this can be read as a companion for the alchemist. I don't understand how that would go well, but this just felt like a collection of stories which are put together, and at times it felt like the stories had a point, and at times it just felt like some person wanted to say something and they just built a story around it, and when we see things together it doesn't make that much sense. It's just how I felt. So like 60% of the book was good and the other 40% I did not care for much, so I ended up rating this one 3 stars. So yes guys, those are all the 20 books which I ended up reading in June, and it was an amazing reading month for me. I'm so glad that I ended up the first half of the year in such a good note, and I'm hoping to have a great reading year for the rest of the year too. Don't forget to let me know your June wrap up in the comments below because I'd like to know what you read and get some recommendations from you guys. If you want me to read anything in specific from my physical TBR or out of my physical TBR too, please do let me know that also down in the comments, and I'll try to pick those books up as soon as I can. And if you did enjoy watching today's video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also share it to your friends. If you want to get more content from me, do subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and have a great rest of your day.